The incredible power of the Astra Militarum comes in the form of massive armored vehicles, a whole bunch of warm-bodied meat shields, and of course, volleys of lasgun fire. But is this famous energy weapon from Warhammer 40,000 actually a practical weapon of war, or is it just a hot mess of sci-fi rule of cool? Today we're going to find out by comparing it to a tried and true weapon, the United States military's M4 rifle. On the right here, we got a common variant of the lasgun used by the Canadian shock troops. And on the left side over here, we have Air Force Master Sergeant Courtney Higgins firing her M4 carbine. And no, let's not get into the whole carbine versus rifle debate. I know those things mean certain things, but that's outside the scope of this video, okay? So what we're gonna do today is compare these two weapons. First up is gonna be about logistics. So the lasgun, of course, is an energy weapon powered by a battery pack, or I think it's just called a power pack. So from a logistical perspective, this is actually hugely important. See, ammo is actually pretty heavy. A fully loaded M4 magazine, a standard capacity of 30 rounds, is a little bit over 1 pound, and a typical US soldier is going to be carrying at least 7 magazines on them, if not a lot more. And then not only do you have to carry more weight on the soldier, but also now you got to have a whole supply chain when it comes to moving ammunition from bases wherever they're stored to the field where they're needed. And that's just more weight in transport, more fuel cost, more tracking stuff. So in theory, a laser rifle should be a lot better, assuming that the actual power pack provides a lot more rounds, for lack of a better phrase, than a standard capacity magazine of the M4. Now, figuring out exactly how many times you can fire a lasgun with a power pack is a bit sketchy, but we have a product from Games Workshop we can take a look at. So this thing right here was some sort of like dice marker kit that they released for Warhammer 40,000. I think it might have been 6th edition. I don't know, I sold this thing last year sometime on eBay. But it was designed with a container that was supposed to be a lasgun power pack. And we can see on here the capacity of a power pack is approximately 144 to 147 discharges. So effectively, a Canadian shock trooper would carry 2 of these, and they would have then more ammunition than most US military soldiers. So we're already winning a little bit in the logistics field when it comes to the lasgun. And then you have to talk a little bit about, of course, you don't have ammo, but then comes in recharging. This is where we get into a little bit of that messy rule of cool going on, because it's kind of silly when you think about how the lasgun can be recharged. But for the most part, when it comes to a military, every rifle they have has a storage spot somewhere. And it would just be in the case of the lasgun, when you put it in the storage spot, it's going to start charging. So that's definitely an advantage when it comes to having to have a gun that needs to be reloaded with bullets. And when you consider the sheer scale of the human Imperium in Warhammer 40,000, this would make the military's life so much easier. The logistical size and things they deal with is just mind-blowingly huge. Honestly, when you read about how the Imperial Guard attacks a planet and loses 1 billion soldiers in one day, and the response is, well, let's try it again tomorrow with 3 billion soldiers. It's like, it honestly makes the entire US military war effort in World War II seem like a freaking overnight backpacking trip. It's just that massive. So that's why having a rechargeable gun is actually really, really helpful in improving logistics. I did make a little bit of jokes about some of the goofiness, because you apparently can toss the battery pack in a fire, and that's a way to charge it, or you can just charge it via solar power, which is just really silly and ridiculous. But on the topic of tossing in a fire, that does sound kind of like a cool thing, but that's definitely like a sci-fi author being like, hey, this is cool, because the reality is a soldier is going to be either in a relatively safe place where they can charge their rifle, or they're going to be in the field where, for the most part, they don't want to start a fire because fires attract the enemy. We'll get back to our main topic here in just a moment, but I wanted to mention, of course, that for a few more days anyway, I'm still running the Kickstarter for my Fractured Colony 3D printable gaming miniatures. So if the Avalon self-powered artillery here, or the Pitbull main battle tank, or of course the Coordinator Alliance's Lionel class attack drone look cool to you, you can head over to fracturedcolony.com or check out the link in the description below to see how you can back the Kickstarter and get these STL files for these FFF FDM 3D printable gaming miniatures. Alright, let's head back to our main topic. Anyway, let's move on past that to talking a little bit about the actual stopping power of these weapons. Of course, stopping power is a fancy firearm terminology for how well can you basically neutralize your target. And when it comes to the Lasgun, I feel there is a whole lot of Imperium propaganda going on. So reading over here in the Warhammer 40k wiki, we see the Lasgun uses a small portable capacitor power pack to produce a focused pinpoint laser beam, which is strong enough to take an ordinary human arm off with one shot, but is not as effective against the more durable alien bodies and the stronger types of personnel armor. Here's the thing about that. Now, back in the day, the Lasgun had a strength of 3, which meant you would generally wound a human opponent on a 4+, or a 50% chance of wounding a human opponent. Taking off an arm with a pinpoint laser shot does not sound like a 4+ damage to me. It sounds like there's a little bit of embellishment going on there with how truly powerful this weapon really is. Whereas compared to the M4, you really don't want to be shot anywhere with the M4 because, granted, you just don't want to be shot anywhere with any gun. But it's going to be a bad day pretty much wherever you take a round from the M4. So in this case, I think it's going to come to saying that the M4 has probably got more stopping power than your typical 40k Lasgun. Now it's time to talk about the range of these two weapons and see how they compare. I'm not entirely sure what the US military officially considers the maximum range of the M4 rifle to be, but the AR-15 platform in general, in my opinion, is really more for 300 yards and less engagement range. I know that soldiers have claimed kills out to about 500 yards, and that's pretty reasonable to assume that happened. The problem is the 5.56 cartridge is fairly lightweight, and when you start getting several hundred yards out, wind becomes a real factor, and there does become an element of just dumb luck and how windy it is that day, whether you can accurately hit anything beyond a few hundred yards. Let's compare it to the Lasgun by looking one more time at that product Games Workshop released a while ago. If we zoom in here, we can see the range rating on this particular power pack is 19 megathule. And if you're like, that's ridiculous, what's a megathule? I think you're crazy because that's a perfectly cromulent word. What it actually means is that when in the context of a Warhammer 40k story, the exact range of the Lasgun is going to be exactly what is needed to tell an interesting and exciting story. Maybe one time it's going to be really long to get some cool shots on the enemy Xenos charging you, and other times it's going to be so pathetically short that you're just going to be overrun and mercilessly slaughtered because you are the Astra Militarum. Also, by using a fake range number, you kind of solve the problem where you decide that your fancy long-range missile is really long-ranged, except that 20 years later, some random concerned citizen can go into their local FFL and cobble together a bunch of PSA parts to make a DMR that outranges your fancy long-range sci-fi missile. Not to pick on any one particular game in that case. But to really answer the question of whether the Lasgun or M4 has a longer range, you really got to think about this one thing. You may think you're the hero of your own story, but are you really the hero of the author's story? Because if the answer is no, then that range that your Lasgun is gonna have is not gonna be enough to save the day. So when it comes to made-up fictional numbers versus some sort of real number, I think the real number is going to win, and we're going to go with the M4 rifle in this case. So let's talk a little bit about lifespan and maintenance of these two weapons. When it comes to this topic, the M4 and Lasgun are kind of in the same ballpark range. So let's take a look at the wiki entry for the Lasgun for some more information. A quick cleanup while mumbling a prayer to the weapon's machine spirit after usage is all that's needed to keep it going for over 10,000 shots, after which the focusing crystals must be replaced, an action that requires the intervention of a knowledgeable tech priest. And when it comes to the M4, long story short, 10,000 shots is probably about right for certain components needing to be replaced. Some need to be replaced sooner than that, some probably later. But in this case, the firearms are kind of on par with each other, but here's where we get to the part where the M4 probably has a little bit of an advantage. As we saw in the wiki here, the focusing crystals must be replaced by a knowledgeable tech priest, where when it comes to the M4 and AR-15 platform, those parts can be pretty easily replaced by any average user of the firearm without a whole lot of additional experience, additional training. It's pretty straightforward to do. Therefore, I'm also going to give this category to the M4. And finally here, let's talk about variants of these weapons. If we head back over to the wiki here, there's a whole bunch of different variations on the common Lasgun that for one reason or another, some military unit has changed with their special purpose or something cool like that. So it seems like this is a highly customizable weapon, but as best I can tell, all these things listed here are really just unique firearms that are built differently. When you compare that to the M4, which is a highly configurable firearm, now I assume the military's got quite a few restrictions about what you can actually attach to the various rifles, but with the AR-15 platform, you can go ahead and change pretty much everything out about the rifle and end up with an almost completely different rifle than what you started with, which means you can pretty much create all these equivalents of these Lasgun variations with just a single base rifle and a whole bunch of individual pieces. It is a much more modular system than what the Imperium uses, and therefore for the final category, I'm also going to give this one to the M4. So I think if I'm counting right, that's a pretty sizable win for the M4 rifle over the space magic of the Lasgun. So hopefully this video helped you guys cut through some of the Imperium's propaganda and see that indeed this terrifying, fearsome Lasgun is really not that particularly useful of an actual firearm. It's really unfortunate when you think about it. But anyway, I want to thank you guys all for watching. Just one more last note to check out my Kickstarter for Fractured Colony Miniatures over at fracturedcolony.com. Link down in the description below if you want to head over that way. And oh yeah, one more last really important thing when it comes to all this. Just keep fighting for the greater good. I'll see you guys all next time.